MIT did a study that showed that during the first 6 months of the Great Resignation, culture was actually the number one predictor, was the single best predictor of whether or not an individual was going to quit and walk away or resign. And what was interesting is that compensation ranked 16th, and culture was determined to be 10 times more likely than compensation to determine whether or not a person quit or stayed. But isn't it interesting that when it comes to retention policies, a lot of our retention policies are built around compensation? I sat in too many rooms throughout the course of my career talking about maybe a new sales strategy or a new go-to-market strategy. I sat in too many rooms where every time the word strategy was mentioned, someone would say, well, you know what Peter Drucker says, right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. I don't know if that's a famous line in the UK, but it is in the States. Like,
I have heard it, yeah.
Yeah, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I was like, and anytime I heard that, I'm like, first of all, I've heard that dozens of times, but it's not a very helpful. Like, I don't need some pithy aphorism. I need just explain to me, if culture eats strategy for breakfast, explain to me how it prepares the meal. Like, how does culture influence the performance? So it was that causation that I went looking for.
How many people leave jobs because of a toxic, incompatible, or even just lacklustre corporate culture? Organizational culture, company culture, team culture, culture. What do we mean by this often overused word in the modern workplace context? And perhaps the most important question we'll be trying to answer with today's episode is, what can leaders do about it when that culture isn't quite there? It's not up to scratch. Craft beer on tap, free pizza once a week, beanbag chairs, away days, table tennis in the kitchen. None of these things are culture, really. And yet they're quite often that sort of knee-jerk token response that many leaders will grasp for when they're trying to solve a problem they've recognized. And as we'll be discussing today, it is something leaders need to be thinking about. Culture is something you have to intentionally be growing if you want to ensure that it has a positive influence on your team. There are no quick fixes or token one-offs that are going to solve it for you. So to talk through all of this and more, today I'm joined by Dan Bredeson, founder of Lead Front Consulting. He is also the author of an Amazon best-selling book called The Seeds of Culture. Dan is an organizational culture and leadership consultant with over 20 years of experience, and he's held several leadership positions with Fortune 500 companies and non-profit organizations. So we're going to get into all things culture and leadership today. I feel like I've said the word culture so many times now that it's starting to lose meaning. But today we're going to be exploring why it is such a hot topic in the contemporary workplace, the impact and fallout of COVID, the Great Resignation, and more from this cultural perspective, and what, why, and how leaders should be doing about it.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast.
Leadership talk for the modern manager.
With your host, David Hatch.
Dan, welcome to Leading with Integrity. It's lovely to have you on the show. Really looking forward to getting into our conversation this afternoon.
It's great to be here. It's morning where I am. So, but good afternoon where you are.
Yeah, I've got a head start on you. Yeah,
exactly. That's a good way to look at it. I think it's start of the day.
Indeed. So to kick us off then, I will hand the virtual mic over to you to introduce yourself to the listeners. Tell us a bit about your background, your career so far, what you get up to today.
Sure. So my name is Dan Bredeson, and I'm currently an organizational culture and leadership consultant based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Started my career in sales, like a lot of folks do who end up in other leadership roles, but was pretty good at that. And then was asked to lead ever larger and expanding sales teams, and then eventually kind of moved away from the sales process. And now at one point I had about 275 salespeople I was leading, and 40 some managers, and dealing with an awful lot of clients and just strategy and things like that. And then I had the opportunity. I did that for about 20 years. Had an opportunity to take a career break. I'd always wanted to go back and go back to grad school, so I did a little later in life. Got my master's degree in organizational leadership and learning. And while I was in grad school, had the opportunity one semester to do an independent study and research, semester on any topic that I wanted to. And I'd always really been interested in the intersection of leadership, organizational culture, and the performance of an organization, because I noticed that throughout the course of my career, the story of a failing organization follows a pretty standard script. If an organization fails to perform by whatever standard the powers that be, determine that organization should be performing, if it underperforms, then what do they normally do? They bring in a new leader, right? And that new leader comes in and is typically standing behind a podium and makes a lot of grandiose promises, up to and including usually, we're going to fix the culture around here. We need a cultural transformation around here. And it works for a while, like during the honeymoon phase, that every time a new leader comes into an organization, you get a honeymoon of, 12 to 18 months. And a lot of times the cultural fix that a new leader tries is really just doing nothing more than the exact opposite of whatever the previous leader was doing. Or as I call it, the George Costanza strategy for organizational change. If you remember your Seinfeld, George, nothing's going right for him. So Jerry says, well, if every instinct you've ever had is wrong, then doing the opposite must be right. And that's what a lot of new leaders do, is they come in and just do the opposite of whatever the previous leader was doing. And then that works for a while, but they didn't really fix the culture. And then what happens after the honeymoon phase? People go back to doing just what they've always done, which is underperforming. Now the powers that be are beside themselves and they're like, oh, we got to bring in a new leader. So new leader comes in and says, oh, now we're going to lay a solid foundation for culture. So I'd seen that happen so many times throughout the course of my career. I was really interested in it. So I decided to do the research on it when I went to grad school, did that, turned the paper in. My professor says, hey, wow, this is pretty good. If you keep going with it, you could turn this into a whole book. So I did. And that came out last October. It's called Seeds of Culture. And and the subtitle is Improve Organizational Performance by Growing a Culture of Commitment. And now that the book is out there in the world, and I'm starting to do some speaking engagements and running workshops. And most recently, I started doing a workshop called Planting the Seeds of Culture, and just, getting training up organizations and maybe getting them to shift their paradigm on what culture is, why it matters, and how it influences the performance of their organization. So that in a nutshell is kind of who I am and what I do.
So the first question I'm going to ask you after that, and have you heard of the accidental manager? You must have.
The accidental manager.
Yeah.
I may have heard it, but I haven't read anything about it. So briefly. Right. Yeah. So I talk about it quite a lot because it's one of my pet peeves of leadership. So it's basically when someone is promoted to a management or leadership position because they're really good at their previous job. We do that a lot in sales. If you're a great salesperson, then you should be a great sales manager. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, which is why I was going to ask you about it, because sales is the classic example to prove the point. But it sounds from your career history, you might have actually been that very manager.
Yeah, that's, you're not wrong. If in sales, especially you're taught, here's your product, here's your service, here's your leads, go get them, tiger. And then you go out and you get some sales and you show that you're able to do it. And then you'll normally get tapped on the shoulder, and it's something as innocent and as, hey, just drag someone along with you and just have them do what you're doing. Just thinking that by osmosis, I'm somehow going to duplicate myself into this other person. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And then, I was fortunate. I will say that I was fortunate to be in an organization that did recognize that, okay, so now that you've been promoted, you've got this title, you've got this sales manager title, whatever you want to call it. But you can't lead with that title. And I had mentors and other leaders specifically work with us and train us on how to lead. And if someone was a great salesperson that was promoted to a sales manager and it wasn't working out, we would try to give them that different seat on the bus, if you're familiar with that expression, of, back into being a top salesperson. So yeah, I would say at first I was the accidental manager, but I was fortunate enough, looking, through reflection, that I had mentors and leaders who did then, okay, we trained you on how to sell. Now we need to train you on how to lead.
That is another interesting. So my next question was going to be, how did you get past that? Well, the answer is you had great mentors and people who were teaching you leadership, which I think most accidental managers don't get. And that's how a lot of the leadership challenges I think organizations face become perpetuated, because it just turns into a very similar cycle to the one you were describing earlier.
Right. And it was, early in the career, it was like, here's this sales book, read this, or listen to this tape. This is on how to sell. Mm-hmm. And then, probably the first time I got promoted, it wasn't as, I was actually told, this is a quote, just continue to do what you've always done, but drag someone along with you. That was the training that I got for my first salesman. But then so I went from salesperson to leading salespeople to then leading the leaders, leading sales leaders. That's when I really started to get more, okay, so we had you reading these sales books. Now we need to have you reading these leadership books. Now you need, this one. A lot of the classic ones. It started with John Maxwell. That was, kind of the first leader. I can remember the first leadership book I read was Developing the Leader Within You by John C. Maxwell. And that was, I still reference that thing 20 years later, because it's got the 5 levels of leadership, and that made sense in my brain a lot. And, you're given the position of leadership, and then you need to perform for folks. And it's this whole idea of, and one thing that really rang true from that book that I still, like I said, reference today is the difference between rights and responsibilities. And I don't know if you've ever seen that diagram. You should Google it sometime. It's, the John Maxwell rights versus responsibilities triangles. And when you're an individual performer, you have all the rights in the world and you have very few responsibilities. You have the right to not show up to a sales meeting. You have the right to not study your material. You have the right to not be prepared, right? Because you don't have a responsibility for the sales meeting. You don't have a responsibility to train other people to do it. But when you move into a leadership role, it flips. Now you have less rights. You have more responsibility. You have less personal rights. When I became a leader, I didn't have the right to show up 5 minutes late to the meeting. I didn't have the right to be unprepared for the meeting. I had a responsibility to the team. That made sense in my brain. Was like, oh, okay, now, they're all looking to me. I have a responsibility to make sure that I'm bringing value to this interaction, to this meeting, to this conversation, whatever that case might be. So yeah, that was, someone put Maxwell on my desk, and that was at least where it started. And then there's, more conversations after that, but I was accidental at first, but then intentional after that.
Well, there you go. Yeah. It's interesting as well. I think you've spoken very eloquently there to that point of transition from, sole practitioner, solo contributor, whatever buzz phrase we use this week, into leader, into manager. It's kind of the from me to we. It's very similar, isn't it? It's less about your rights and more about your responsibilities. This still rings true. I can remember this conversation that I had. I was sitting across the desk from one of my mentors. There's a guy who actually recruited me into the business, and he gave me my first promotion and my second promotion, actually. And I was complaining about the team, and these people don't do this, and I'm telling them to do that, and I need them to do this, and me. And he just looked at me. He's like, Dan, it's not about you. It's not about you anymore. It's about them. It's about everybody else. So anytime that, that wasn't the last time that I ever complained, but he stuck in my head enough of like, Dan, it's not about you. Stop making it about you. It needs to be about them. So yeah, that's just another example of like, I had mentors and leaders in my role of, yes, I was in sales, but I was in leadership if I was with that company for 21 years. And I would say that actively selling, I only did that for maybe 6. The rest of it was just having leadership conversations and recognizing the influence that culture can have on an organization and developing, growing
the right type of culture that influences performance.
Sorry, I'm muted because there's some construction going on next door.
No worries. Yeah.
Hopefully nobody.
I kicked my dog out just to make sure it wouldn't run into the same problem.
If we hear scratching noises later,
Yeah.
we'll know what it is. Yeah. I was going to say it's nice actually to hear a story about someone who's been through that kind of the accidental manager, the promoted to being a good salesperson in this case, who's then given that extra support and training to learn leadership and learn how to be a manager. Because so often when I hear those stories, it's, well, they just pushed me in at the deep end. I wasn't given anything to tell me how to do it. I was just expected, because I was great at that last job, that would make me at least adequate at leading people doing that job, which is rarely the case because they're totally different skill sets.
Yeah.
So I have to say, yeah, it's refreshing. It's encouraging to hear that
it's possible.
It doesn't always happen that way. Yeah.
Yeah. It's definitely possible. And the thing to remember would also be the accidental manager needs to have the desire to become the intentional manager. I'm sure that the leaders that I had, the mentors that I had, probably gave the same advice to a bunch of different people, but me and other people that I know were the ones that actually did something with it. It's the difference between having John Maxwell's Developing the Leader Within You slapped on your desk and whether or not you pick it up and read it. The same mentor who gave me the, it's not about you speech. He did not give out books, right? He didn't give out books because like things that are free have no value. If I give you a book, you're not going to read it. And I found that to be true, is that when I give books away, people don't read it. If they really want to read it, they'll go buy it because now they're invested in it. They got some skin in the game. So he's like, he's like, I'll loan you a book. He was so funny. You'd have to put like a $5 deposit. Like if I saw a book on a shelf that I wanted to read, he goes, yeah, give me a $5 deposit. I go, what? You got to have some skin in the game or else I'm not going to get it back. I've lost so many books that people borrowed that I've never gotten back. So, it is incumbent upon that accidental manager that they can't just sit there and complain that, I was promoted and I was pushed into it. And no one ever did anything to develop me. Well, there's a little thing called the internet. You can go find more than enough material on leadership development if you have that self-drive and that desire in order to get better at your new job, which is now leadership. If you happen to be in sales, because that's what I was in when I started, is I read a bunch of sales books. I wanted to get better at it. And then when my job changed to leadership, well, I'm going to read a bunch about that. And here we are.
Yeah, I think you've hinted at the other problem with that phenomenon as well, is that quite often nobody really asks that person if they want to be a manager. They might be perfectly happy being a really good salesperson. Maybe they don't want the responsibility. Maybe they're happy with the right.
Yes, that is a great point. And I've been the guy who's promoted folks into the leadership role. They were the great individual performer that moved into a leadership role, and they've asked to go back. And I'm like, that's cool. Awesome. Go back and be great. It's not we celebrated your promotion. Let's celebrate your demotion. Let's go back and you're going to go back and just continue to crush it. And, but so often it's people tie up their ego into whatever their role is. I ran into that quite a bit too, where some of the nicest folks that I know, I was like, this is just not working out for them. But they had either been in that role for a while and all of their self-worth was tied up and their identity was tied up into this particular leadership role, and had to have some tough conversations with, your title is not you. Your wife's not going to love you less because you're no longer regional manager of whatever. Those are tough conversations to have, but I can say that there's only one that I really screwed up, but most of them, except for that one, like on the other side of it, let's say a quarter or two on the other side of it, I've been thanked for demoting people because they were in a spot where they were losing when they were a leader. And now I put them back in a role where they're winning. And, so if you're in a similar situation where, someone, you got to find a different seat on the bus for them, and you can approach it, in the right way where they know that your intentions are good and they know that you're coming at it with a bunch of empathy, it's going to it's going to suck like when you're having that conversation, but have the confidence that, on the other side of it, you're putting them in a place where they can win because they know they're not winning. They, especially in the sales world, they can see the reports just like everybody else. I don't want to give off on a tangent, but yeah, that, when we're talking about promoting folks maybe too soon, not preparing them and what can happen, that's ultimately know how to, transition them out and into a different role where they can start winning again.
Yeah. One hypothetical that I probably enjoy thinking about more than I'd enjoy dealing with in reality, but with the possible exception of the sales profession, because obviously the way remuneration works there is quite different to a lot of other paths. Mm-hmm. I wonder how many people would actually pursue a leadership role if it weren't the only route to get a pay rise.
That's a good question. Because yes, and that seems to be the path forward in most things other than in sales, because there are plenty of salespeople that make more than people in leadership roles. Because, I remember when I was brand new leader in one particular role, probably I had 3 or 4 salespeople who were, on the org chart several steps down, but they were making more money than I was. God bless them. Go make as much as you want. But yeah, to your point, when you're not in sales, when you're working in, I don't know, pick your industry, they're not going to let an individual performer make more than their boss, right? Interesting question. Yeah. Well, I wonder if that's why. But then also the flip side of that coin could be, well, if you do want to make more and you understand that the path to do that is the path to leadership, then learn the skill of leadership, which is a learned skill that I have learned for sure. Yes, there are some people who are born with maybe some attributes or traits that would preclude them to taking to it a little bit better, but I'm convinced that anyone wants to learn leadership, they can. It might be harder for some folks, but if the path to making more money is through leadership, then go learn it.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you on both of those points. Of course, I'm going to say leadership is a skill because I want to teach people leadership. So I'm biased. I'll admit there's a bias there, but
yeah, I was not I made a career in leadership and now, writing about a part of it. And I wasn't, I was never elected to student council. I was never the captain of the football team, American football team. I was never people didn't look to me as a leader throughout high school, college. I was not that person, but when I got working in my career and realized that, well, hey, even in particular sales, the path to, making more money was, through leadership and learning it. So I decided to pick up some books and learn about it. It is a learned skill. People can get better at it. I'm convinced of that because it happened to me. And I've also helped improve the leadership skills of other folks that I've interacted with, quite frankly, just passing on what I've learned and here, read this book and watch this YouTube, take this class.
Yeah, no, I firmly believe it's a learned skill as well. I've seen that a few times now in my career. I've been that person who was just terrible at it and figured it out and learned and read books and did a few courses and but then on the flip side, I've also worked for people who had no reason why they'd be bad at leadership. Like on paper, they had all of those kind of personality traits, all of the experiences that you would think would make them an effective leader. And yet those were usually the worst leaders I've ever worked for. And do you know what I mean? It's a weird one.
Yeah. There's a part of the book where I use the term, or the analogy of leaders should be culture farmers because, my idea of culture is that culture is an organic process. It's not a manufactured process. You don't build culture, you grow it. So if you're thinking about it from a leadership perspective and an organizational culture, think like a farmer, not a carpenter. That's kind of a tagline. Think about, growing the culture of the organization. And so I list, 6 attributes of successful culture farmers that I've seen. And the first one that I talk about is affinity. Do you have an affinity for people? Do you actually like people? And to your point, yeah, on paper, they had all of the things that should lead them to be a great leader. But as you were saying that, what I was thinking about in my head was, yeah, but did they like people? Because I've met lots of leaders who I legitimately don't think they like people. You would think that liking people would be a prerequisite for leading people, but it's not always the case. I've been in rooms with leaders. I'm like, dude, do you even like me? Like, what? Why is such disdain that you're looking at me with? You've got all the marks and the degrees and the diplomas to lead me to believe you're a great individual performer. But if you don't have it in your heart to, care about people and actually like them, then they're going to sense it. They're going to sense it, and it's not pleasant to be around. So maybe that's one thing. They lack a genuine affinity for their fellow human and leading them, and have the right amount of empathy in order to do it with consideration and kindness and generosity. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, caring about the people you lead, I think, I agree. It is a prerequisite to at least lead effectively, at least lead with any success. But I've also found that's a really controversial statement in some circles. And you do get a lot of people sort of saying, well, no, it doesn't matter how I feel about them as people. It's business. I can lead them. It doesn't matter. And you're like, well, to a point, maybe, but they will very quickly figure out if you don't care about them, if you don't like them. And as soon as they figure that out, their respect for you, their trust that you're doing the right thing for their career or their job or even the company is evaporated, it's gone. And then your leadership suffers as a result of that.
What I would say is that, if someone were to ask me, why should I care about them, or why, care about them as people, is the thing that what I recognized throughout the course of my career and the research that I did is that top performing organizations had what I call a culture of commitment. And then we're speaking to organizational commitment, which is that desire to maintain membership with whatever the organization happens to be. It could be, I want to stay working here. I want to keep working for this nonprofit. This is where I want to volunteer my time, whatever the case might be. And an organizational commitment will eventually lead to a sense of community, which increases the performance. It's kind of the 4CP cycle I talk about. But, so commitment. People aren't going to commit. They aren't going to be committed to an organization where the leader doesn't like them. It's just, you're asking, we know that commitment's going to lead to performance. So you're asking the people that you lead to care about the organization, but you don't care about them. Let me know how that works out for you, right? You should probably update your resume because you're going to need it because you're going to be out the door. People aren't going to commit to an organization that hasn't committed to them. This is a two-way street. So why should you care about the people that you lead? Well, because you're asking them to care about the organization. And then they're going to do that if this sense of, I had another mentor who said, Dan, operate with the understanding that most people are going to disappoint you. I was like, oh, that's kind of, and I realized that he was just kind of turned cynical. Because in a leadership role, you're going to see people at their best and you're going to see people at their worst. And if your memory of people at their worst outweighs the memory of people at their best, then that's where cynicism is born. And then that's where you start making statements like, well, I didn't really expect much of this person. I was kind of surprised that they actually did perform. Just operate with the impression that, with the understanding that most people are going to disappoint you, and then you'll never be disappointed because your hopes won't be built up in people. And when I remember I had a good enough relationship with him when he told me that I said, wow, I wish I'd known you when you still liked people. I said that out loud. I can still envision the lunch that we were sitting at when he dropped that nugget on me, and I was like, I wish I had met you when you still liked people. But 2 or 3 years later down the road, I said the same thing to newly promoted managers. I can remember saying the same thing, like, just operate with the understanding that most people are going to disappoint you, and then you'll never be disappointed. And when the words came out of my mouth, I was like, wow, I've become what I dislike, which is I'm a cynic. I'm cynical about people, and I'm not seeing good things in them. And, so why would I expect them to bring good things to the table? It was, kind of a watershed moment for me that when you look in the mirror and say, what have I become? I've become a cynic. So all that to say is, yeah, someone could have all the traits and all the skills and the knowledge of the skills and the attitude or aptitude to be a leader. But at the end of the day, if they don't like the people that they're leading, it's going to come through. People are going to feel it. They're not going to commit to the organization. I don't want to hang around an organization if someone is just merely tolerating my presence.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's so many aspects of leadership and culture as well, I guess, where there's a reciprocal element to things. I think a lot of leaders, especially in the earlier careers or in certain other contexts and settings, they tend to look at it more as a one-directional relationship. The leader says something, the people do the thing.
Yeah.
But we could talk about trust, we could talk about respect, empathy, all of these things. If you don't give it, you can't expect to get it.
Right. I got a question for you. So here I am in the States. You're in the UK, right? What are the differences? What if you work with folks in the EU, like what in leadership and org culture, is there any differences that you've noticed, recognized?
I think there's a lot of differences in terms of from a legal perspective and employment regulations, definitely.
Yes, that'll rear its ugly head. Yeah,
there's a lot of protections in the UK and the EU that I don't think you guys have in the States. But I think there's also perhaps a different attitude to work.
Okay,
I think there's that. So I think it's a cultural. It's difficult because I've not worked in the States, so I can't speak to it. But the perception from the outside is that working extra hours is the norm and that's just what you do, and overtime pay isn't a thing. Whereas in the UK, yes, there is some of that, but people will complain about it a lot more and are less likely to agree to do it, for example. Now, maybe that's an unfair perception. I don't know, but
I have worked I haven't worked in the UK, but it was years, 20 plus years ago. And it was very, very low end individual performer work. Let's put it that way. So I don't know if I can speak too intelligently. I would say overtime pay is a thing if you're an hourly employee, but if you're a salaried employee, then it's just like, well, this is what we're paying you. So you need to get the work done. If you can get it done in 40 hours, then that's kind of on you. In the States, it's interesting you bring up the labor law and regulations. Since it is the states plural, it's very much a state by state thing. Right. So if you are in California, where I spent 20 years of my career, it is really labor friendly. It is, many employee protections, more so than Texas, Florida. I'm in North Carolina right now. And Charlotte kind of sits right on the border of South Carolina as well. I drive 28 miles that way. I'm in South Carolina, and it's a different ballgame from like an employment standpoint. But state lines, states' rights aside, the overall, well, from the States, I can tell you that everyone here thinks that not everyone. Okay. There's a perception in the States that in Europe, like everyone's gets like 3 months off, and that everyone's on holiday for a long period of time. And so there's this perception from my perspective anyways, that you get so much time off and it's so labor friendly and all that kind of thing. I do know that every job that I ever worked, a short-term job that I worked when I was in London, 20 some years ago, they always wanted when it was my time to leave, because I was working like temp jobs here to there just to make some money and pay for my flat and travel a little bit and go to the pub. But every job that I ever had, they always wanted me to stay on, and they always wanted to keep me. And they were like, well, you Americans are just so hardworking. We want to keep you, because I can remember there was one that it was just a data entry job, and we had to see how fast we could enter. We were processing parking tickets from a particular borough, but I made it into a competition. I wanted to be the first one posting. I wanted to be get the most done, because that was just how and folks were looking at me like, what? Why does he why is he doing it so fast? I'm like, come on, let's compete. Let's do this. Let's see who can do it the most. So, but that's just one guy and one guy's story. But it's interesting, the perceptions across the pond, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. So one thing I have heard from a couple of people I've spoken to from your part of the world is this idea of an at-will employee.
At-will employment is you can, at will, you could also leave, or you could be fired. Now it's different states are going to have different rules, and also different companies will have like, their human resources kind of rules is yes, you can, but also, companies don't want to get sued. They don't want to get into the murky. So it's not quite as simple. There's also, they want to manage perception too of, it's not a good look for companies if they're laying a bunch of people off or firing a bunch of folks, especially if they're publicly traded companies. So it's managing the legalities and perception. But yeah, at the end of the day, if someone wants to let you go, they're going to let you go.
Yes. Yeah. So I guess that's another difference is there are minimum notice periods, which depends on length of service as well. Like you have to be in the company for a certain period of time in order to qualify for things like that.
Yeah, that's different.
You mentioned holiday. I mean, it's not months, at least not in the UK. I think I've lost track, to be honest. It's been so long since I was employing anyone or being employed. I think the legal minimum is 20 something days a year, which includes bank holidays and things like that.
Okay.
Which it's not terrible. It's probably not the best in the world either, but
I came on, last W2 gig that I had, when I started, and this is in addition to, as you would call them, bank holidays or national holidays, observances for Martin Luther King Day or President's Day or, Christmas, Thanksgiving, the whole 9 yards. In addition to those, I was given 20 days of PTO, but that was used for whatever that you wanted to. So that was pretty decent. My wife actually works for a company with unlimited PTO, which is she can take off as much time as she wants, but obviously if you don't get your job done, then you get fired. So which have you ever heard of the expression like a results oriented work environment? It's where if you can get your job done in 20 hours a week, fine. I'm not going to just force you to sit at a desk for another 20 hours. Just get the results. But if it takes you 60 hours to do it, well, then, it's a results oriented work environment, which is just get the work done when you need to get the work done. And I would say that's my wife works in one of those right now, which is she works from home. She works for like an IT company, software company, and, she has unlimited PTO, but it's like, well, just get your stuff done when you need to get your stuff done. In the States, speaking of the regulations, state by state, like I just came from California, which was like really labor friendly. You could accrue like massive amounts of PTO, meaning that there was no use it or lose it rule on your PTO in California. So you could bank like just hours and hours and days and days and days. And then, and I know this from experience, because then when I chose to quit employment in California, the company was required to pay you out whatever PTO you had accrued. So they ended up paying me out like 3 months worth of salary from the accrued PTO. But in North Carolina, there's not a similar rule. In South Carolina, there's not a similar rule. So like state to state, it's a little bit different as to how much time you can get paid off. But one reason why companies have gone to unlimited PTO is that since it's not a set amount, it doesn't accrue. Therefore, they're not paying you out anything if you leave.
That's interesting.
We're going down a rabbit hole of PTO, but
we are a little bit, yeah, but
yeah,
it is interesting. So, and I wonder if that's why that idea hasn't really taken off in the UK. It's because even if you were to adopt that approach, you'd still have to pay them the legal minimum.
Yeah.
If they haven't used it when they leave.
Yep.
Interesting though. Interesting. So something else you mentioned.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say from something else you mentioned about companies not wanting to get sued. That maybe is another difference. How common is it for an employee to take their employer to court for something in the States?
Not that common, but it's pretty common for them to threaten to do it. And if there's a threat, you're still paying the lawyers. Yeah.
Interesting. Because that's not I mean, maybe an idle threat here, but I don't think anyone would realistically do it because it's just too expensive.
And that's it's a small percentage. But it's the percentage of people who threaten versus actually do it is very large, comparatively. But overall, if I would say the average person doesn't want to stick around at a place where they're not wanted. So unless it's some kind of egregious, disrespect that happens on the way out, most people are just fine. I'll go find another one,
Yeah.
From a leadership perspective, to bring it back around to that, then obviously the leaders in the UK need to, each got to understand the waters that you're swimming in from a legal and regulatory standpoint. And, did the Great Resignation, this is from a cultural perspective, because I wrote a whole chapter on kind of why culture matters. And I framed it in a Great Resignation because the book would have come out about 6 months sooner, but right about the time I was finishing it is when the Great Resignation was on every headline, at least in the States, and every third article on LinkedIn was talking about it. And it was all a buzz. And I'm like, I can't really write a book about culture and not write something about it. But what was interesting was MIT did a study that showed that during the first 6 months of the Great Resignation, culture was actually the number one predictor, was the single best predictor of whether or not an individual was going to quit and walk away or resign. And what was interesting is that compensation ranked 16th, and culture was determined to be 10 times more likely than compensation to determine whether or not a person quit or stayed. But isn't it interesting that when it comes to retention policies, a lot of our retention policies are built around compensation? At least in the States, it's if you work here 5 years, you get this percentage of a pension or whatever. If you work here 10 years, it's a larger percentage. And there's, increasing their pay for the number of years that you're here. It's a lot of the retention strategies are built around comp, not culture. But yet culture is 10 times more likely to predict whether or not you're going to maintain your commitment to that organization. So yes, culture does matter. People seem to know that, but it's how does it actually work, and how do I actually plant it within the organization? A lot of years, and that was the search for causation is what led me to do the research and write the paper, which led to the book. Meaning I sat in too many rooms throughout the course of my career talking about maybe a new sales strategy or a new go-to-market strategy. I sat in too many rooms where every time the word strategy was mentioned, someone would say, well, you know what Peter Drucker says, right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. I don't know if that's a famous line in the UK, but it is in the States.
I have heard it,
yeah. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I was like, and anytime I heard that, I'm like, first of all, I've heard that dozens of times, but it's not a very helpful. I don't need some pithy aphorism. I need just explain to me, if culture eats strategy for breakfast, explain to me how it prepares the meal. How does culture influence the performance? So it was that causation that I went looking for. I just did a workshop for a startup, and they've been around for 18 months, and they had done several pulse surveys on, every quarter they do a pulse survey, figuring out the employee engagement and this kind of stuff. And the results of the fourth quarter pulse survey were great. First of all, 86% of the people responded. That's high. To a voluntary survey, that means they care. They asked the question, how likely are you to recommend this as a great place to work to a friend or colleague? And the scores came back 9 out of 10. And I looked at the comments, the individual comments that were made. And on 14 separate occasions that people said, they used the word culture when they mentioned this. So the question asked, how likely are you to recommend this as a great place to work? And unsolicited, 14 people used the word culture to describe it. They asked another question, which was, have you thought about leaving in the last 6 months and getting a job somewhere else? Culture was mentioned 0 times. So when asked, is this a great place to work? They said culture, but it was never mentioned as a reason why they would leave. So all that to say that the organization had an outstanding culture. So there I am standing at the front of the room in a workshop type scenario. And I shared these stats with them. And I said, so you're probably wondering, why is this guy here? You're probably wondering why I'm here. If you already have a great culture, why do you have some culture expert up here? And I told them, I said, because I'm here to ask you one question, which is, how did you do it? Can you articulate how you wound up in this place of having a good culture? Because if you can articulate it, then you can duplicate it. As you turn, did you just get here accidentally? Or did you get here intentionally? Did you just get lucky with your culture? Because you're a startup, you're looking to grow. It's really tough to scale luck. It's really tough to sustain luck. But if you can understand how culture actually works, then you can do the right things in order to grow it, in order to sustain it. And the idea from a leadership perspective is a lot of cultural misses that I see leaders make is by thinking that they can plant the culture all on their own. And my idea is that you need lots of culture farmers. Everyone needs to be involved. They all need to understand that it's a ground up, not a top down type of scenario. And if folks understand like how it works, then they can duplicate it, and then they can scale it. They can sustain it for the next new person that comes on board. Because when you're in a new employee orientation, they're telling you what they want you to do or what the company does. But it's not until you go and sit down with your coworkers that you're going to understand how we do it and how we do things around here. And that's going to be the culture. So, don't know where I was going with that, but yes, that's how leadership ties into org culture and ultimately the performance of an organization.
Yeah, I think, there's so much of what you just said that's interesting. One thing I think I will pick out is around culture will happen, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So as a leader, if you're not thinking about it, if you're not, as you say, being intentional, if you're not hesitate to use this word, but if you're not attempting to manage it, it's going to happen anyway.
Right.
And you may not like the direction it goes in or the culture you end up with if you just kind of turn a blind eye and just leave it to itself. And I think that is a trap that a lot of leaders, especially in startups, actually will fall into. They won't think about it. It's not a priority. We're doing the big shiny thing that the company was started to do. That's what my focus is on as the leader, as the founder, etc. And quite often they realize too late when the damage is already done.
Startups are, and I've started working with more of them. Startups, almost by definition, are in the honeymoon phase. Everything's new, everything's exciting. We're growing, we're hiring people. Oh, we just got funding, get another round of funding. Like it's new and it's exciting. It's a honeymoon, but eventually the honeymoon's over, and you got to come home, and you got to get on with life, and you got to write the thank you cards for your wedding gifts. There's things that have to happen, and not that it's too late, but it's the analogy I use for culture being an organic process. And I grew up on a farm, so that's why I kind of tie that in. Right. Is if you don't cultivate a field, if you just turn it over to Mother Nature, stuff's going to grow, right? It's not going to be in nicely organized rows, and it's not going to be the crop that you want. It's just going to be a crop of weeds, and it's going to be, it's still going to grow something. It might not be what you want. It's probably not going to be what you want if you just leave it to Mother Nature. And an organization. So what I'm saying is that a field left to Mother Nature is just going to grow weeds. An organization left to human nature on its own is going to grow a bunch of weeds. So that's why it's incumbent upon leaders to be, good culture farmers if they want the right type of culture to grow. Because you're exactly right. You're going to get something. There's going to be a culture there. But it's about getting a culture of committed individuals that all want to perform for the organization because they want to be there. There's three different types of organizational commitment, and one is, and the most powerful one's called effective commitment. And that is, you're there, you wake up every day, you get out of bed and you run to work because you want to be there. It's like the work means something to you. There's continuance commitment, where you get up out of bed and you run to work because you need to be there. You got bills to pay. You got 2 kids going to college. You got a mortgage. Like, only 2 more years till I'm fully vested. That type of commitment. And then the third one's normative commitment, where you get up out of bed, you run to work because you feel obligated to be there. David, you took a shot on me when no one else would. I really appreciate that. I've been approached by other competitors, but I could just never leave you because, you've mentored me and you feel this obligation to be there. The one that drives the best performance in an organization is effective commitment. It's that I'm here because I want to be here type of commitment. And if you get a large enough group of people who are there because they want to be there, then they're going to have like a sense of community and they're going to protect that community. And ultimately they can weather any storm, good or bad. The next pandemic that hits or the next global recession that hits, they're going to latch onto each other and they're going to perform through that because, it means that much to them.
Yeah, I like the field analogy as well, I have to say. Something there will grow, but you might not be able to live off it.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it is good. I think thinking back as well to the Great Resignation, and again, I'll declare my biases here. There's two of them. One is I've mostly worked in small businesses in tech and specialist driven things where the job market has always been a bit different even before the Great Resignation. And I think one of the reasons why culture factors in so heavily there is because most of those kind of knowledge specialist workers know full well they can get the same or better pay pretty easily, actually. Just go somewhere else. So I think that's why the kind of putting the emphasis on the pay scale doesn't always work because it's not their it's not their priority, and B, it's quite easy to find elsewhere.
Yeah. There's got to be something else. The point I made in the book, I think the way I phrased it was during the Great Resignation, individuals learned that getting a better job does not mean just getting better pay. It means finding better culture and something that fits with your, fits with different needs that you have. Because during the Great Resignation, there was, I can't remember the exact demographics, but a couple of different sources talked about a lot of folks who quit and resigned during the Great Resignation were like in the prime of their career. They were in their prime earning years when they were just like, nope, I need to go do something else. Yeah.
Which brings us to my second bias, which is I suppose one of those people.
Yeah.
I walked away from the best paid job I'd ever had because of a toxic culture. Yeah. And I think, yes, I'm biased because of that experience, but I also think one of the interesting lessons from that, at least I think it is an interesting lesson, everyone has their line, right? You can only push people to that line. The pay will only make them stay up to that line, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I think that's very much a cultural aspect as well.
We went from the Great Resignation to, which was all over the headlines, but then, and that's also like it's a pro-cyclical economic event, meaning that if the economy's a dumpster fire, then people aren't going to quit their job because they can't go find another one. I don't know. Is it still as easy to job hop in tech now? I don't. In the States here, all I hear is people getting laid off. So that's probably going to ebb and flow with the economy as well. But everyone's got a line, and at some point they're like, no, I'm done. I'm out. Oh, we went from the Great Resignation to then it became quiet quitting, right? That was, that's what's on folks' minds now, which is that's been around forever. I can remember I've employed plenty of people who did, the bare minimum to just not get fired. They were doing just enough to not get fired. And, there's two different ways to think about that. One, which is, they are meeting the bare minimums of their job. But kind of to our conversation earlier, it's like, that's not the American way, man. You're supposed to do more than what the bare minimum of your job is. So that's what, it's a cultural thing is, don't just do the bare minimum to not get fired. You're supposed to do more. So I can see two sides of that coin as well. But if folks are doing just the bare minimum to not get fired, there's a lack of organizational commitment. There's a lack of that effective commitment that I talked about, which is I'm here because I want to be here. I believe in the mission of the company. I really like my coworkers and I want to help them out. Or I really like my boss who took a shot on me and has been a mentor to me. Like, folks will go the extra mile. If that's called organizational citizenship behavior. they'll go the extra mile, either for their coworker, their peer, or for the organization if they believe in either one of them enough. But as a leader, and this is a practical tip, if someone on the team does go the extra mile, don't make the new mile the standard. And I've seen, because then that leads into job creep, and then it just ticks people off. I've seen a lot of leaders do that, where, Susie asks for a report to be on her desk by Wednesday at noon, and Jimmy decides to turn it in on Tuesday afternoon. Well, that makes Susie really happy. And now she just starts asking Jimmy to do it every Tuesday. Jimmy's like, I did it that one time because I had some extra. Now you're going to, like, I kind of went out of my way to do it, early. And now you're asking me to do it early all the time. Like that, then resentment starts to build up. So if someone goes the extra mile, don't make the new mile or that extra mile the new standard.
Yeah, I agree. Quiet quitting, to me, I've always found it quite problematic when you hear employers complaining about it. I really struggle to have sympathy for because maybe this is a cultural difference. It's certainly not the British way to go above and beyond every single day all the time in any job, I don't think, at least not as a default position. But so in my head, right, if you're doing the minimum requirements of the contract of employment for your job, you're doing your job. That's what you're doing. So to complain about someone doing their job,
I know. That's why I said I can see two sides of it.
Yeah, I don't know. I've always struggled with that one. But having said that, when I was an employee, I like to think, certainly in my earlier career, I definitely went above and beyond. I did more than I needed to do because I wanted to be seen as a good worker and I wanted to be valued by the company.
Yeah.
But I do think that dynamic has shifted as a result of not just the Great Resignation, but I think the COVID years. There's so many employees kept their businesses open by working from home when they, certainly in this country, didn't have to.
Right.
We had a lot of government incentives and it was called the furlough schemes and things like that. So people were basically paid not to work instead of being made redundant or their company folding.
Yeah, we had similar types of,
Yeah. And so to come out of those years, and I think this is really part of the Great Resignation afterwards, where suddenly everyone's like, well, come back to the office. We need to get back to work. It's like, well, so many people are like, well, we didn't stop working. In fact, your business is still here because we didn't stop working.
Right.
Maybe don't take this particular approach with us now.
The couple things.
I've oversimplified that. I know.
No. The inviting folks back to work, right, is there was two things I was going to unpack there, but I'll remember. So I wrote a book on culture, right, and it came out like October. So when folks learn that I wrote a book about organizational culture, almost without fail, what I get asked is, well, what about remote work? What is, culture is what about culture in a remote work environment? And they ask me that question because I don't know if it's the same way in the UK, but in the States culture is probably the number one reason why companies are saying that people are being invited back to work. Invited back. They're being welcomed back to the office, and they always go to culture. Well, our culture really took a hit now that everyone's working from home. And I kind of call BS on that a little bit. A friend of mine put it very succinctly. He said that weak leaders want everyone in the office because it's easier for them to manage. It's easier for them to manage if they can see everybody. It takes a strong leader to be able to lead and effectively lead folks who are remote. So it makes the leader's job easier. It makes the manager's job easier. With that said,
I think a lot of it is about trust as well, isn't it? I think, and my response to that has always been like, if you don't trust your people to work where you can't see them, then you don't trust your people. That's either a you issue or a them issue, but either way, you need to solve it, right? And it's not the answer to just force everyone to change their working patterns again. Yeah,
the point I'm making in autonomy is one of the seeds of culture is that if you don't trust your folks to do the job that you hired them to do, then you need to look in the mirror, dude. You need to think about your hiring or your training practices, because that's kind of on you. So when folks ask me that, what about remote work? What about remote work? I said, well, what about it when it comes to culture? Because was your culture defined by cool stuff? Was it defined by, we have beanbag chairs and we got craft beer on tap in the break room and, we got if you're ever stressed out, we got a padded room full of golden retriever puppies. Is it the cool stuff that defined your culture? Was it the cool location? Oh, we had the coolest offices in Brooklyn. I mean, it was great, or was it defined by, do people have to be right next to each other in a cubicle in order to get anything done? Do Jimmy and Susie need to be working next to one another, need to get anything done? What if Susie's tired of hearing about Jimmy's CrossFit, right? And Jimmy's tired of hearing about, Susie going to a soccer game on the weekend. Like there's also those time wasters that happen when folks are together. So, or is your culture defined by how we do things around here, which is the working definition of culture that I found and use, which is culture is how we do things around here. And it may seem overly simplistic, but if you really think about it, those things are everything. Culture is how we walk, how we talk to each other, how we talk to customers, how we hire, how we fire, how we promote, how we demote, the interactions that we have with them. When the culture is how we do things around here, and all of those things need to get done, whether we're here in person bugging each other at the cubicle next to us, or we're doing it like this, right? On Teams. Those things still need to get done. And if we can do them without sitting next to each other in the same cubicle, why are you forcing people back who really don't want to be there? And at least the American job market has shifted to the point where they're not so confident they can go find another job, right? We're not in the Great Resignation days, but that pendulum's going to swing. It's going to swing the other way. And if they're pissed off because you forced them back to the office, the first opportunity they get to go find another job that's not in the office, they're going to take it.
Definitely. And in the meantime, they're not going to work as hard.
Right. In the meantime, they're going to do the bare minimum to not get fired.
Exactly. Yeah. They're going to quiet quit. Yeah. No, it is a good point. And I laugh when you mention the beanbags as well, because again, I've worked in that office.
If you worked in tech, then you had, cool stuff.
Craft beer on tap, though, I feel like I missed out on that one.
Yeah, there was in Charlotte, North Carolina, there's a kind of our little metro. They call it Uptown. I don't know why I call it Uptown, because more often than not it's downtown. But in Uptown Charlotte, we've got the football stadium, and folks were like, yeah, we got the coolest offices. We can look right down into like the stadium from our office. I'm like, cool. You still have to drive there like 40 minutes each way and pay for your own parking. And really, is it worth it? Is that worth it? The view? But yeah, I can, not to say that bringing people back into the office. Yeah, there could be there's probably a lot of organizations that do perform better if everyone's back in the same spot, but if it's universally recognized among your employee base that they don't want to be there, you're going to have a problem at some point. So,
yeah, I think this is what it comes down to for me as well. Is two aspects of it. One is the employee voice. Like, have you had the conversation before making this sweeping declaration?
Right. I
think maybe quite a few businesses have, and fair play and great work to them. But I do feel like the ones that are making the headlines, probably it's because they didn't, and they're just trying to impose it on people.
And they got a really expensive office lease that they're trying to.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely. And then secondly, I think hybrid is the way forward, because there are, much as I love the remote work and being out of the office and not having to just have that constant noise around you all the time impacting your productivity, there are sometimes things that you can only really do well if you are face to face. Now, there is a conversation about how are we redefining what face to face means? Does it have to mean physically face to face, or can it just be a video call? I don't know. Hard to tell. Can't decide myself on that one. But
so remote work, because I've been asked about this enough, and I worked remotely for a couple of years, and this is just my own personal experience. I liked working remotely, but I also liked getting together in person at least once a month. And for some, call it some kind of team meeting or some kind of offsite situation, it was nice once a month to see coworkers. And I was working with people from not all over the country, but a fair bit. And we would, fly into a certain location. Now I know there's a certain expense that goes with that, but it was nice. About once a month, once every 6 weeks. That was enough for me. It was enough of that kind of human interaction. You know the deal. You fly in, you have a meeting, you go to dinner that night, maybe have a half day meeting the next day, and then you exit out. Those were nice. Those were a nice break. Human interaction. We get a lot done when we're in the room, but when I say a lot done, I think it's as much relationally as transactionally when we're in the room together.
I think that's it. It's the social aspect, isn't it? I can't talk a very good game here because I've been out of the office, in inverted commas, since pre-COVID by about 6 months. So
you're an early adopter.
Yeah, I've been working for myself by myself since then. But I think if I were to do it again, first of all, there'd be the conversation with everyone else in the team to find out what works best for everyone. But I think as a happy medium, it would be, once a month, we'll meet up in person somewhere. We'll hire a meeting room or a venue, or we'll just go out for dinner or something. Because I think you do, even with colleagues and even with the business setting, that social aspect is important.
Yeah. And
a lot of people who used to work with me might be surprised to hear me say that, because I was always the resistor to any social gathering from work. But I've grown.
Yeah, we miss that we don't have, right?
Indeed.
No, that was my personal take on it, and folks might. And on the flip side of it, having a guy worked in sales, if anyone who knows me is listening to this, they may find it hard to believe that I'm the guy who only wanted to be out once a month, because I was usually the guy dragging folks out. Like, come on, man, let's go out for happy hour. Let's get together. Because it was just so easy and convenient when everyone's right there. So
absolutely. Well, I've just seen the time. Are you okay for time if we do a couple more questions?
Yeah.
I got lost in the conversation, haven't we?
No, I took us down a regulatory path that I wasn't.
No, that's all good. It was interesting, at least for me. So, seeds of culture. Then you've spoken about. I think you've probably given us 2 or 3 of them already. But what are the seeds of culture if you've not covered them all?
Sure. The first one, and then in no particular order do we plant seeds of culture, but except for one. The first one that I talk about is effective communication, and not just communication, but effective communication. If you're a really poor communicator, don't try to plant seeds of culture. It's not going to go well. And people might ask, well, what does he mean by effective communication? I've broken it down into three areas, which is clarity, transparency, and consistency. If you can communicate with clarity, if you can communicate with transparency, as much as transparency as you can have, and then consistency. So clearly state the message, be as transparent as possible, because if you try to hold things back from the organization, the story that people make up in their head is always worse than the truth. So just tell them the truth. They're adults. They can deal with it. And then consistency. Don't just bounce from shiny object to shiny object, or else no one's going to listen to what you're saying, because they'll just say, well, yeah, I know that's what David told us last week, but he typically changes his mind. So we're not going to listen to that. So the first one's effective communication. Second one's pretty simple, ethics. And the way that I had a whole big long list of semi-finalists for the seeds of culture and then it was like, well, how did I pick these 7? First step was I put them through the absence test, meaning that in the absence of ethics, would you commit to an organization? Like if an organization didn't have ethics, are you going to commit to an unethical organization? No, not in the long term. Well, then ethics must be a seed of culture. So just pretty simple. I don't give a whole big long spiel on ethics. I think we kind of all understand what that means and being a part of it. Third one is psychological safety. That is this idea that I can make mistakes, I can experiment, I can try to innovate, understanding that it's not always going to work out, but no one's going to stab me in the back if I fail. I can come in and share ideas, and there's this group level of trust that if I'm in a meeting, I can be vulnerable and no one's going to use it against me. That's in essence what psychological safety is. And it's really a key to innovation, because if you do try to innovate, you do experiment, and it often doesn't work out. But if everyone laughs at you and you're embarrassed by it, you're not going to go try something new again. You're just going to go back to doing the same old. Diversity is a good start. That's the next seed of culture, meaning, but it can't just be bringing a diverse group of people into a room. You need to be given the tools that they need to succeed from wherever they're starting out. So that's equity, not equality, equity. And then there needs to be an inclusive environment, meaning that where everyone feels the ability to bring their full selves to work. In America, especially, DEI has become so politicized that unfortunately folks don't understand how it actually impacts performance. I don't care about the politics of it. I cared about it from a performance standpoint. And when I did the objective research on it, I said, all right, objectively speaking, if DEI improves the performance of an organization, then I got to write about it. I did the research. It does, especially if you want to be innovative. So we got to include it as a seed of culture. Generosity is another seed of culture. And that's not just generous with compensation, although that's part of it. If everyone's drastically underpaid under the market, then they're not really going to commit. But if you've got compensation, right around where the market should be, but then now you're also generous with your praise, you're generous with your time. When you're generous with your understanding and empathy, then folks are going to commit to the organization. Autonomy is another seed of culture, and that is, feel free to, we talked a little bit about it already, which is, if you don't trust your folks to do their job, then you need to look in the mirror or change your hiring or your training practices. Have you ever read anything by Daniel Pink? Book Drive, great book. It's a great book about motivation and what really, how we get that internal intrinsic motivation. And he breaks it down into autonomy, mastery, and purpose. If folks have autonomy, they feel as though they're mastering their craft and they have some kind of purpose as to why they're doing it, they're going to be intrinsically motivated to go and do it themselves. So autonomy is, I have the ability to make the decisions that I want to make to do the job in the way that I know. Now, it doesn't mean that you're free from ramifications if you do a bad job. It just means that, hey, I'm a big boy. Let me go try to do this job in the manner in which I see fit in the situation that I'm in right now. Give me the autonomy to do that. I'm going to be more motivated and more committed to the organization if you give me that latitude. I understand that if I fail, that's on me, but at least give me the opportunity to fail. And then finally, if you plant those first 6 seeds, then the final one's mutual accountability, which is sort of the hybrid seed of culture is what I call it. When all those other 6 things start to grow together, you're going to get an organization that wouldn't it be great if peers were asking each other to be held accountable? If you were my leader, David, and if I came to you and I say, hey, hold me accountable. The point being here is that the way that accountability is wielded too often is it's like a club. I need to inspect what I expect and I need to hold you accountable. That's not very inspiring. But, as I say, I hate being held accountable unless it's my idea. Perfect example of, I hate being held accountable, yet I'll hire a personal trainer. Do I really need someone to sit there and count my reps? Or do I need someone to hold me accountable to show up on this day at this time? But it's my choice. So if you can get an organization where people are holding each other accountable because they want to be there and they want to protect that culture, performance is going to go through the roof. So there they are. That's the 7 seeds of culture.
Well, thank you. Yeah. And hard to find any point of disagreement with any of that, to be honest. And what I think all the way through our conversation, particularly the second half of it, really, it keeps tying me back to what you said much earlier about tying things to the outcome rather than time spent at a desk. I think there's so many of these problems like quiet quitting, great resignation, culture even, dare I say, could be solved if we could just shift that mindset of management away from I'm paying someone to be at their desk 9 to 5, although I really expect them to be there from 8 till 6 or whatever. Yeah. What I'm actually paying for is the output that's produced, the value that they deliver to my organization. And I think that mindset shift, it could solve so many of the assumptions, the misunderstandings, the poor practices when it comes to culture and leadership as well, to be honest.
This is still, unfortunately, well, it's starting to shift, but there's still some holdouts to the whole, man, even taken all the way back to the Industrial Revolution of the way that work was managed. And your country started it back in the 1800s, but then mine in the early 1900s with just the kind of almost taking the scientific approach to work management and looking at it as individuals as just another resource that we need to exploit, for lack of a better word. But as we moved into an increasingly knowledge-based environment and knowledge work, it's going to require a shift in the paradigm of what culture is and what measuring people on their outcome, not just the number of hours that they put in. Post World War II America, just the idea of the punching the clock and punching in, punching out, and things are different.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, there's similarities in both our countries there. I think about, certainly the Industrial Revolution context, like back then, that kind of made, there were definitely societal culture reasons why it was done in that way and why it made sense for the rich capitalists at the top to be doing things that way. But also physically, the means of doing work, in many cases anyway, was a big giant machine that you'd never get at home. You couldn't possibly own, and you had to physically be present there to make it work and do the things. That's not true anymore. The means of creating the work is a tiny little device in some cases that you can carry in your pocket. Right? And everyone has one, so you don't have to go to where it is.
Here's a podcast. Since you got a podcast, you probably like to listen to them as well. There's one called A Short History of. And are you familiar with that one by Noiser?
I've heard one or two episodes of it. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, and I just happened to listen to the one on the Industrial Revolution a week or so ago. But that's I can get through one episode, a day, typically, like on the morning dog walk and the afternoon dog walk. Nice. I love that. It's about 45 minutes ish, but it's and the guy narrating it was great.
Leadership Heroes.
If you had to pick one person, and they could be anyone you like, alive or dead, past or present, real or fictitious, who in your opinion would perfectly embody leadership, who would that person be and why?
This may be some recency bias, only because I'm currently reading a biography about this gentleman. This is going to be this is going to be a popular opinion. How about that? There's no big surprise here, but our own President Abraham Lincoln. I've read quite a few stories about him. I'm currently reading a biography on him, and here's why. It's easy to say President of the United States, Emancipation Proclamation, all of that's true. That's great leadership, helped keep the country together during the Civil War. But the reason why I'm going to say him is because his leadership was learned. If you read through his full biography, he did not start out as a great leader. He had to work at it, and what I thought of him before I read more about his youth and his early days, in politics, what I thought I knew about him is he was always known for having when he was in office, an even temperament. He had extend people a lot of grace. There was a famous story about, I think it was General McClellan one of his generals had just had like a massive defeat, and Lincoln wrote him this scathing letter, just chewed him up and down, just like about how bad that this general happened to do. And he wrote it, and then he put it in his desk, and he never sent it. Like because he knew that wasn't going to help the situation. So he was just very even-tempered guy, very right. But he was not like that in his youth. He was fiery. He was good at insulting people. Right. I think he got challenged to a duel because he insulted a guy. So he learned how to, because I can run kind of hot myself. So his even temperament that he eventually he got, you could maybe is due to maturity or whatever, or maybe he just happened to work on it. I would aspire to go from hot-headed to the even temperament that he has as a leader.
That is it's a good choice. I'm sorry, but we've had him before, so no bonus points for you today.
Well, I wasn't going for originality.
Yeah, no, I think there's a reason why he's picked fairly frequently, though. And your explanation, I think, is different to some of the others that I've heard in the past as well. So what I really like about the story where he leaves the letter in the desk and never sends it, we talk a lot in leadership these days about emotional intelligence and EQ and empathy and all of that. One aspect of that a lot of people forget is the self-management piece.
Right.
And that's exactly what he's done there. He's vented the anger and the frustration, but only he knows that he's done that. It's not had an impact on any of the people he's leading. And I think there's a massive lesson there for anyone who's ever got frustrated at work and just blown it.
we can throw that grenade, or we can pull the pin and hold onto it ourselves. So,
yeah, exactly.
Or put the pin back in. So
definitely.
I do have to bounce to another call.
No worries. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Dan. If any listeners would like to learn more about you or perhaps get a copy of the book, where can they do that?
Anywhere you buy books. So it's Seeds of Culture. Anywhere you buy a book, you can find it.
Okay. Well, I'll try and find a link myself and pop it in the show notes. So
that'd be great.
Easily.
Yeah. This is a great conversation. Love it.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it as well. Thank you so much for your time. Hope your next call goes well and have a great rest of your day.
All right. You too. All right.
Cheers, Dan. Well, thank you so much to Dan for that brilliant conversation. I really enjoyed it. And we covered some really important topics there that are also quite interesting to me. So that's probably why I enjoyed myself. Listener, I hope you also loved the chat, found it as interesting as I did. And if you would like to learn more about Dan and possibly get a copy of that book, do check out the links in the episode description. Almost out of time, so join me again next week when I will be speaking with executive coach Eric Sardina about leadership, authenticity, and living your purpose. And that's all from me today. Thank you for listening or watching or both. And until we meet again, be a leader, not a boss.